how do you put all this together? What does it look like? We're going to go on a practical tour of a virtually self-sufficient homestead. But before we do that, when we think of thriving abundance, I don't know what your homestead is going to look like. It may not look like this house. The outbuildings may not look the same. But let's talk about the elements that need to be there. The elements of design. Now, understand, why would I be talking about this? I believe that there is coming a time when we will need to be less dependent on inputs. What happens when the weather forecaster says there's going to be a snowstorm at the grocery store? How much toilet paper and bread and milk can you buy after about 8 hours of them singing that song on TV? Okay, have I made my point? Because if you don't have some of that and you're not self-sufficient, okay, that's why I believe in a homestead. Every person who prepares is one less person who panics in a crisis. Mike Adams is a very sharp guy. If you don't follow his blog and his website, I'd encourage you to do it, because he's the one that blew the whistle on Whole Foods, saying some of your stuff, some of your rice protein has heavy metal contamination. They said, oh no, not ours. And he proved with receipts, and he has his own forensic lab, and he's written a book about what's in our food. Unfortunately, there was a challenge with Whole Foods, and their share price dropped for a while because of his reporting. We all need to know. Once we get information, we'll be far more prepared. Why do I think this? I think this because there are peak resources: oil, water, other resources. Now, you can contest that oil is peak or not, or whatever, or solar power will take place of our dependence on oil and we'll go electric. That's fine. There's some of us that are working on some of those things, but I would encourage you to go and Google Earth Day Ecological Quiz and the free carbon footprint calculator. Take the test, because it will be a revelation to you about your consumption while on this journey. Our greatest consumption is because we are a couple that drive a lot of miles. My wife does home health. That's just part of that journey. But look and see how much of the resources you are consuming, because once you look at that, you're going to get a picture. Well, I could change this and I could change that, and it would reduce my consumption by doing it. And there are some things that are relatively free. We will, once we understand our consumption footprint and our lifestyle, we can begin to make educated change. Where we live is a factor. That's why some of the green housing is so popular. In fact, I have a friend who built some housing in Nashville. It looks like a 30s farmhouse, but it's new, and it's super insulated, and it has all the green stuff. When they got ready to build it, they got it built, and then when they got ready to sell it, they had a bidding war about who was going to get to buy it. So if you build it and you do it right, they will come because they want that. Well, I want it too. I just don't want to have to pay an arm and a leg. And I'm happy to tell you that you can build an energy efficient house for between 8 and 12% more than a regular house. Well, before you get all indignant and say, well, why didn't I get one of those? We haven't had the incentive. We haven't invested. We have had cheap resources and we are consuming them at a pretty good clip. We believe in comfort rather than preparing for a crisis. Case in point, it takes 1.2 gallons of gasoline to produce what you're going to eat in a day. 1.2 gallons. Now, if that's $2 a gallon, that's $2.40 worth of fuel, right? So it takes 15 calories of fossil fuel to produce 1 calorie of food. Do you see the problem here? We need to get more intentional, and a homestead will do that. Abe Lincoln said years ago, before long, the most valuable art will be the skill of making a comfortable living from the smallest area of soil. No community with this skill can ever be the victim of oppression. Just like the guys in Tula, Hungary, grew and were in demand for what they grew, people will flock to us for answers if we have those answers. So where are our answers? That's where we're going. Now, there's a house not too far from here, and I talked to a fellow just last week that last year built 35 tiny houses. Because it's far better to be a visionary and be prepared now than to be totally unprepared when faced with difficult or devastating challenges. And we're going to talk about facing hard times. This is this young lady's house. It's one room. It has various functions on the various ends. She has a sleeping area up in the loft. You can see her drawers over on the left-hand side of her room. She has a little porch out there. She has a seat, some flowers on it. And you know what? If she doesn't like her neighbors, all she's got to do is jack it up and move it somewhere where the neighbors are different. Skylight. There's the other end, little heater. She has a stove, some plumbing. Now, I don't know, again, what your homestead's going to look like. We're going to go tour a homestead very similar to this. You'll notice that these people farm with horses. You can notice their house there in the center. You'll notice the workshop over to the right, and then the hothouse, the long tunnel, and then the low tunnels where they're growing stuff. It's early in the year. The corn is not up very far. The orchard is over to the left beyond the horses, beyond that hothouse. Very few inputs. They probably buy some kerosene, some wood. They may buy some building materials when they need to build something. When they build a house, they have just passed a cost of $20,000 for the materials per house. Now, it's a 4-bedroom house. Well, 5 if you count the master bedroom, because upstairs has 4 bedrooms. But understand, they don't have any electricity. They may have some plumbing in it because they will have a windmill and a pump and a hand pump if there's no wind. And they'll pump it into a tank, and they'll probably have gravity-fed water, the house and the barn. But it's a simpler house to build than the heat and air and the electrical and all the houses that we generally build. But the cost is a whole lot different, and it doesn't take them long to build one. I've seen them put up a barn in 2 days, and a house may take 2 weeks if you really want to push it. So as we look back historically, we had far less inputs than we generally consume now. Our ancestors had shelter from the land. They had provision from the land. They lived off of the land. And I would suggest that you may never have to experience mega hard times yourself. But if you acquire the appropriate knowledge and share it with others and encourage them to do likewise, it is likely that sooner or later that knowledge will make the difference for someone. I had a good friend in the Plain community tell me the other day, a man is truly poor if he can't figure it out and do for himself. Okay? So what are we going to, where's this going to be? Well, you can do it in the city, but there are a lot of people looking over the fence, and they may decide that they're hungrier than you are and you have more to eat. So I would suggest that rural is better than city. If things get bad, you have more availability to grow and get your provisions. You'll want a woodlot. You'll want areas to grow and places for the various things you want to do. Wilderness, you may think about it. You may decide that a community is better than just going it alone out in the wilderness. Again, I have never seen the ideal piece of property. I saw an ad the other day for a house that had a natural gas well and a dam on a stream by that house. 3-bedroom, 2-bath. I don't know the price, but all the houses up there are on their own natural gas wells. The challenge is it's 40 or 50 miles from anywhere. Okay, well, maybe that. Understand, assess it. Is it ideal? Is it practical? Water. Can you have gravity water? What about heat? What about power? What about light? All of those things go into your assessment. Elliot Coleman tells us that if you have a south-facing 10 to 15 degree slope, that you will have a microclimate 300 miles to the south. When I was doing a growing class series over in Fletcher, North Carolina, usually they don't get out of frost until the end of May. And the middle of March, one of the gals said, well, I planted this and this and this and this in my garden. I said, what are you doing planting now? She said, well, I'm on a south-facing 10 to 15 degree slope, and I have a rock masonry wall at the top of that slope that gains the heat during the day and releases it. Understand your microclimate. Do a site assessment and think about, now if you live on the north side of the mountain, how available is that going to be for you? So just think about it. If you think you need the ability to limit access to your road, to your property, that's fine. You can post your property. The best deterrents to adventuresome humans are probably the animals. I would trust bears probably more than I would trust some humans, because at least I understand them. Guineas are your probable best watchdogs, because you can poison a dog. You can't poison a small flock of guineas, and they will tell you if anything out of the ordinary moves. Now, it may be grating on your nerves when they tell you, but if you want the ability to limit access, you'll not want to be on the power grid, because you give them a right-of-way to bring power to you. You won't need a phone, and you certainly won't want GPS in a cell phone. Just saying. Let's talk for a minute. Ed and Carolyn Robinson in the 80s wrote a booklet entitled The Have More Plan, and it describes a homestead. Before that, the original ones were Helen and Scott Nearing when they wrote their book. Okay? That's what started it. And in that Have More plan, there is what is called the basic acre. On that basic acre, there's a house with adequate storage. Now, a farmhouse has different storage than a city house. A farmhouse, well, we're going to talk more about that. We'll have a harvest kitchen. A harvest kitchen, if you're going to put up all this stuff, you have to have all the stuff to put it up. It's going to take more cupboard space. It's going to take more, well, it's probably going to take a pantry to put your food in. You may have cold storage and a root cellar. You probably, if you have any yard, will want to make provision for a play area. If you have children or your grandchildren, maybe they'll come to visit you. And then we're going to see, and I would suggest you need to think about a kitchen or herb garden. You can get away from a lot of the deleterious foodstuffs if you have plenty of good herbs, especially if they're fresh. And you can go out from your kitchen right out and pick the produce right there and prepare it. You're going to then want a food production garden. That's where you raise beets and carrots and beans and corn and tomatoes and all those normal vegetables. You may freeze those, you may can them, but it's going to take more. Squash, for instance, pumpkins take a lot of space. Corn takes quite a bit of space. And then you're going to have your edible landscaping, an orchard, landscape with fruit trees, grapes, berries, bees. They'll work for you, whether you're working or not. I'm for it. And bee pollen is superfood, remember that. Whatever barn you need, a workshop is necessary, because when you use things, they're going to break, and you're going to want a place where you can go and work when it's rainy and wet and cold outside, and get ready for when it's going to be nice outside, so you can be efficient in your work outside. And you're going to want a woodshed if you have wood. It will involve fencing and gates. I would suggest one of your main criterion of necessity is a good compost pile. Not just from your stuff. You're going to want everybody's stuff coming to your place, because that's where you're going to get your nutrients for all your growing. Goals and objectives. We need to think about this. The reason I like living in the country on a homestead is the quality of life. We have some wonderful neighbors. We try and be wonderful neighbors ourselves. And if we need something, you know what you do in the country? You pick up the phone or you honk the horn, and if their dog is loose, They call you and say, my grandson's dog, have you seen a spare dog? No, we haven't, Austin, but we'll call you if we have. And, oh, they found it 3 doors down. And they went down, visited, and said, this is our dog, and took it home. So there's a lot of give and take and helping. And then I like nature because I feel relaxed, I feel connected. There's a spiritual connection that I can get there and I can't get in town. We recently took vacation. Since we live in the southeast, we went through the Atlanta airport. On any given day, on average, there are 274,000 people that go through the Atlanta airport. You talk about little tadpoles in a great big lake. We were it. We were really out of our element because we like country life. The lifestyle. Now, I wish we lived a more calm, more sedate lifestyle, but we'll get to that. But when we go home, we can wash the cares. It used to be that our driveway was 1.5 miles, and about half of that mile we went right by the creek. And I will never forget, I had 2 or 3 jobs. I was a workaholic. There were a lot of dysfunctional things there, and that's why a book was written about our marriage, and that's why I did a whole series entitled Life Choices about the principles that govern relationships. But I remember driving past that creek and feeling all that tension begin to lessen and wash away driving by that creek. I would suggest that, and we're going to look at some of this, you need at least 2 years of wood on hand. And probably, well, at least a year of food, probably more. And if you grow your own, you can have more. It's no big problem. Keep it. You need 1 year of other consumables. What are you going to use? You can establish a seed bank with some seeds in it. But seeds are going to be an issue when we go through the community and this homestead. One of the things that I asked were, what about your inputs? And one of the things is they buy a lot of the seed that they use. Now they save a lot of it too, but I didn't realize that they bought as much of the seed for their production as they do. And then whatever you have, buy another one. Because if you have it, it's going to break and you're going to need to repair it. And you're going to need the tools and knowledge to be able to do that. But those are the goals and objectives that I would think about. Now we're going to talk about how to prepare for hard times. I would suggest to you that a root cellar can have multiple functions, and if you're going to get locked in over a period of time from a tornado or something, and it's in the root cellar and you have something close at hand that you can eat, that's probably a benefit. You want to make sure that your door comes inside rather than opens outside. You say, why in the world is that? Well, if a tree blows down and it's in the way of your door and you can't cut that tree, it's going to be a tomb rather than a root cellar. So you want it to be able to open in. Just some things, we'll talk more about it. You may decide that in an area you want a hardened room, that you want it to be able to withstand some gunfire and etc. That you may think that things are really going to get bad, and they may well. There are books. One of the best books that I know of is Skousen's The Safe Home. It tells you how to do that on a shoestring budget. It tells you about a safe room, how to build it, how to make exits to it, but there's all sorts of things that can be considered there. Now let's talk about how this country home differs from a city house. Most houses in the city have a little stoop for a front porch. The neighbors can't go along and visit, talk to you from the road, and you sit on the front porch if you don't have one. So when I build a house in the country, I want a big front porch. I want to swing on that front porch. And I want to be able to swing in that swing on that front porch. I don't want great big bedrooms where everybody's in the bedroom, and we're going to look at this. The bedrooms can be little because we're only going to sleep there. And then we're going to have the heat source as a wood stove down there in the great room, and that's where you cook if you want to, if things are really bad. And that's over here's the table where you eat from, and then there's the living room a little bit. It's all one room. And you know what? Everybody spends their time as a family right there. Been there, done that. That's the way I'd build the house. Yes, a wood stove, probably a wood cook stove. You may want the things to can. That's the best way, not needing any power to keep it frozen or whatever. You may want to dehydrate. Their method, and it takes a whole new, different set, somewhat more things to dehydrate. Yes, smaller bedrooms. The greatest challenge to living in the country is fire. You need to be proficient in the extinguishing of fires that you don't want. There are some real stories in our history of dealing with fire. You probably want a metal roof because that's less prone to catch fire. You want to be energy independent as much as you can. There are some seminars that you can look at, the affordable alternative energy systems, the carbon-free home, redundancy, outbuildings, a seedling house to grow seedlings, a woodshed, barn for whatever animals, for whatever equipment. Your lifestyle will determine it. It'll determine the food that you grow, the type, and how you grow it. Your food production area, what you grow there. Fruit, nuts, and berry considerations. We've covered most of those. And then your production and storage area. Power, lights, water, wood, and transport. We're going to look more at those. And then how are you going to deal with your personal health from an outpost standpoint? If you use vitamin C, you may be able to escape all infectious diseases, virtually all of them. Community can be a challenge. Social interaction and skills versus specialization can be an advantage. You need to think carefully about it. You can have an urban homestead, but I encourage you to look at the resources, study what you really want so that you're comfortable. Follow the advice and just do it.